Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Wildcard Sunday where we look at things a little bit different from our regularly scheduled videos during the week. So today we are looking at Batman 497, cover dated late July 1993, kind of an iconic issue if you collected comics in the 90s. This is kind of like, I would say, definitely the height of my comics collecting in my first run as a kid becoming a teenager. I was way invested in the comics and way invested into Nightfall, you know. It was the 90s, the death of Superman had just happened, Image Comics, all that. And DC figured out with the death of Superman that they had made millions and millions in sales. So they figured, hey, let's apply kind of the same concept to Batman. Batman is to be broken. And they always kind of say this, and I do believe to a certain extent, listen, as a kid, when you're fresh to this kind of stuff, you've never been exposed to these ideas before. So you think it's the first time that any of this is happening, right? And a lot of those guys who'd been in comics for years knew that, you know, killing Superman, they were going to bring him back. Breaking Batman's back, they were going to bring him back. And with a healed back, right? So that is, of course, what happened eventually at the end of both of those storylines. But it was our kind of first version of that, right, in the 90s. So... and the 90s were particularly, again, early 90s, good for comic books. Lots of people were buying them, and everyone was trying to up the ante, and this is definitely an event that did that, right? Image Comics kind of, and that batch of artists started doing a little bit of that stuff and pushing the envelope while they were working at Marvel and DC. And then starting Image kind of pushed it even further. And, you know, Marvel and DC did have to compete with that. So one of the ways DC did was with these kinds of events. So a very iconic issue. This is the original first print. It's actually in pretty decent shape after having been moved around for more than 30 years. And I remember, you know, this tagline, you thought it could never happen, the breaking of the Batman. And this is the issue. I had all the Nightfall stuff. I went back and got the prequel issues. You know, I followed all the way to when Batman came back and started, Bruce Wayne had to train his body up again to become Batman and to have the skills again, the fighting and the reflexes and all that. But this was really, you know, the pivotal moment of that whole kind of storyline. Obviously, what, as they deemed here, the breaking of the bat, as it's referred to. Don't know exactly why they threw this on there specifically. The 90s had gimmick covers, so I guess this is a slightly gimmicky cover without being too gimmicky and without actually obscuring the actual cover, which looks great. I was starting to figure out artists and stuff. Kelly Jones, to me, there was something similar to Sam Keith in some of his depictions. Like this pose here feels almost 100% like a Sam Keith pose, like the Max or something, right? Even though it's Bane. And some of the feathering is a bit cleaner maybe with Kelly Jones, but I always found out later that there's definitely a reason why there's a kinship, you know, artistically, aesthetically between Kelly Jones and Sam Keith. They did work together for a while, right? So they learned tricks from each other, obviously. And there's something else I wanted to mention. Yeah, I always thought this Tyrannosaurus Rex here was horrible. Sorry, Kelly Jones, you draw great stuff most of the time, but this one here is kind of not a win for me. Unless you were going really for how he looked in like a lot of the older, more vintage comics in the Golden Age, then maybe I wouldn't take points off for that. And this wasn't even the final issue of Nightfall. This was somewhere in the middle of the whole thing, so this is part 11. Let's have a look inside. So the basic gist of the storyline with Nightfall is that Arkham Asylum, Bane has basically blown it wide open, let the inmates out of the asylum, and Batman, you know, already being tired at the point where that started. That was kind of in the prologue issues before Nightfall started. Now he's got to go out there and catch, you know, all these guys who escaped, and that's what he's been doing for the past 10 parts of Nightfall. And you know, he's finally gotten back to Wayne Manor and hoping maybe to get a bit of sleep, and of course not, because once he gets upstairs, he realizes Bane is there and Alfred is knocked out. Let's look at the creative team. Doug Monk is the writer. Jim Aparo is the artist. Dick Giordano, I think, I'm not sure, is the inker. Adrien Roy, colorist, and Richard Starking's letterer. And the title, The Broken Bat. Obviously, you know why. Jim Aparo being the artist, I mean, back in the day, I was a little disappointed. Not that he wasn't a great artist, and I did already associate him with Batman a lot, and I found, you know, Jim Aparo may be the one guy who drew the most Batman pages or comics all throughout his run. I'm not 100% sure on that, but he certainly did draw a lot from, I think, even possibly like the 70s, but even possibly the late 60s to the early 90s. This Nightfall series was kind of a send-off, and the last part of it, if I'm not mistaken, was issue 500 of Batman. This is 497, and he drew the first half, and then the new artist who was taken over after, with Batman becoming the Azrael Batman. So Azrael was his successor after having had his back broken in this issue. And Mike Manley, I believe, is the artist who took over. And Aparo, like I said, does a great job. Back when I was a kid, I probably would have preferred some Image guy or Kelly Jones or someone doing it. But looking back on it now, he does a solid job. And, you know, Jim Aparo sometimes phoned in some issues, I think, of some Batman stuff here and there. But I don't think he was doing it on this one. I think he probably knew kind of the impact it would have. And also, you know, probably going to be one of his most well-paying gigs in comics, I would think. This comic probably sold a lot. Don't know if it sold as much as The Death of Superman, but I think it was pretty darn close. Yeah, so Jim Aparo, kind of from the Neil Adams school, you know. And I associate him with Batman because his was kind of the house style for such a long time, 70s, 80s, 90s. A lot of, before I started collecting, and I would, you know, occasionally check out other people's, my friends' Batman comic books from the 80s. Most of them that I would see were drawn by Jim Aparo, and he did draw the Death in the Family storyline, which maybe helped cement him as kind of the Batman artist, at least for a while there. Like I said, almost 4 decades. And to get Dick Giordano to ink him, he's another guy who, you know, he inked back in the day Neil Adams on Batman and was kind of a consistent inker all throughout Batman comics. Again, just like Jim Aparo from the 70s to the 90s. His depiction of Bane, I think, is pretty darn good. You know, definitely more of a 90s kind of design on Bane, and I think he does a good job there. With Jim Aparo, there's never, you know, everything's clear. The storytelling's great. You're not going to worry about that. One thing I noticed a lot as a kid, and even now going through this issue, he often does the tilted horizon. You know, the tilted horizon usually happens more in outside shots and action shots, but he uses it like a lot. You got it here. You got it here. You got it here and here, and basically every shot on this page is a tilted horizon. Almost never like a direct shot. You know, if you look at this panel, this panel, this panel, all tilted horizons, which is a neat trick to just, you know, especially in a storytelling sequence where guys are just talking to each other. It's an easy way to make the pages a little more dynamic. I do feel like his layouts too, he's doing some of the stuff that I don't feel he was doing before, or haven't really noticed, where some of the panels overlap a little onto and over others. Kind of a McFarlane thing more than something I would associate with Jim Aparo, but I could be wrong on that. Here he sequences the panels, right? So, you know, there's even the beats in time, right? With the way the overlaps work, I like that. And always I just find this page cleverly designed and still very easy to read, not too complicated. He's not going crazy with the design, but, you know, this actually is kind of almost the splash of the whole page, and he's just got these 2 insert panels here. Even though we got 3 panels here, that is obviously the same image just cut up, right? Which I'm always a fan of if it's done right. And I think it's done really cool here. Really cool. So Bane is just basically explaining to Batman, you know, that he's the one behind everything and that he's here to kick his ass. I don't know why Bruce Wayne necessarily finds the need to throw his mask on before he fights Bane. That's kind of an odd thing. Probably wouldn't do it in the movies, right? You want to see the actor's face every once in a while. But yeah, I guess he's got to be Batman to be fighting Bane. But, of course, the inevitable happens, as you know. Like, I like just the little touch all throughout these first few pages of Batman having kind of a 5 o'clock shadow here, right? So it's showing you that he's been out for days and he hasn't shaved, so he's probably dead tired, right? But yeah, there's not much, you know, this issue's end is pretty inevitable, and the storyline was leading all to this moment. So basically the next few pages are just Batman getting his ass handed to him, and a little bit of showing you kind of what he's been going through in these flashback sequences that you can make out, because Aparo's a great artist and does a very vastly different kind of panel shape to it, almost kind of dreamy and cloudy, which I think is a nice touch. And then the colorist is supporting that by throwing in kind of more of a monochrome color scheme for those kind of flashback sequences. You got another one here that's like they're visually very easy to identify right on the page, which is very important. And like I said, you know, he's always been a solid artist. So everything, you know, Bane throwing Batman into the glass case here. Every action is clear and easily read. The framing of it, you know, with Alfred here in the foreground, you know, the hands not in any way interfering with what's going on in the background with Bane and Batman, almost framing the action, right? The hand pointing to Bane, and this framing the bottom, creating a darker space, a lighter space, and then a dark space. Very clever. Even here, you know, going down the steps and into the Batcave. It's a faraway shot, so you can get away with doing simpler kind of penciling on Bane and Batman, and you know, the stairs even. This panel must have been a dream to draw. Like, how quickly do you get through that? And storytelling wise, it still tells the story we need, and it's easy to understand. More of those flashback sequences. His Riddler's pretty buff, surprisingly. Little off model, I would say, but man, maybe not in the comics, right? He's always been fairly athletic in the comics. I like this panel. I think is great, and again, telling the story. You know, he gets out of the way of Bane's punch, but just like he's, you know, like a prize fighter who's just still going on reflexes, but has no power left. Even here, the face he does when he punches Bane in the stomach there, you know, you can see that Batman's just done. So kudos again to Aparo for showing that. You know, when we compare with like a flashy artist, you know, I've reviewed Rob Liefeld a lot. I don't feel Rob Liefeld has it in him to have this level of storytelling in an action sequence, right? Even just that facial expression. I don't know if Liefeld can draw that facial expression. And Bane clearly notices that, you know, he says, "You are already broken." And again, just more flashbacks to Arkham being blown open here. Great shot. The Joker. Every time I see the Joker drawn by Jim Aparo, I think of Death in the Family. I read that. I was pretty young when I read that. Robin getting beat up with and hit with the crowbar was just pretty rough stuff for me as a kid. I was pretty surprised by that. I got over it, but I mean, every time I see his depiction of the Joker, that's what I think of. Now Alfred's scooting away to try to get help. He says Tim, who is the Robin at that point in time in continuity. And yeah, just again, you know, the back and forth of Bane kicking Batman's ass thoroughly, and you know, seeing what led to this point, seeing Batman overwhelmed by all of his villains and crazy people that were released from Arkham. And again, we've got that kind of different panel shape. He's kind of dropped the extra shapes he was doing. I'll just show you guys again. Yeah, so on this first page where, you know, he does these extra little bits around the panel, and I guess he thought, nah, it doesn't quite work as well. Like I would, or they're not necessary, right? So it takes less time to just not draw that and just have this kind of, you know, rounded off broken panel. So he just sticks to that here, and it works just as well. And again, the colorist, you know, nothing flashy in these early 90s DC comics, but print quality is good. So when you get some flat colors, they really fill in. You can barely see the dots here, which is great. So you got him fighting Amygdala, I think his name is. And then there's Mr. Zsasz, some interesting characters there from the 90s that I don't think have been brought back much. The Mad Hatter, right, we've seen, the Riddler from before, but, you know, some of these characters are maybe more 80s, 90s centric. And Zsasz was in the movie, though, in the video games. I could understand for video games, you know, they're going to need a lot of characters, so they're going to go back and they got lots of continuity to look at to pick out characters. But Bane, yeah, just, I mean, first of all, the penny falls on Batman's back. So even as a kid, I was like, well, is that where his back's broken? Because you would think, you know, that would be the thing to break someone's back, not just Batman's. The way he violently throws him into the Batmobile here, head first, I think is pretty cool. Not the act of it, obviously, but the depiction, the drawing of it. So Bane here breaks off a stalactite or a stalagmite. One goes up and one comes down from the ceiling, so I'm not sure which is which. And starts basically beating Batman with it. I thought for sure, I was expecting more of a stabbing use for that stalactite or stalagmite, but maybe I was wrong. I was misremembering this new word that people say. So just, again, more of the same. Flashback sequence to the prior Nightfall issues. And the action just keeps building and building. And it's just, again, Bane kicking the shit out of Batman. And again, you know, Death in the Family was a very kind of pivotal storyline. And there's one more reminder of that here where, you know, as he's thrown through the glass case, it breaks and the Robin costume falls on him, and it's Jason's costume. Jason was the Robin that was killed by the Joker, right? So this is the B story. Alfred going over next door. It just so happens that Tim Drake and his family live close by, or well, at least he and his father. I think his mother's passed away by this point. But yeah, so comes to get some help there. Nightfall, issues 13 and 14, or part 13 and 14 were in the showcase series. I remember that. You know, for completion's sake, I did get those. They were hard to find. Back in the day, I had to pay a few extra bucks for them. And I love this Glenn Fabry shot of Batman. You know, back in the day, I was like, whoa, that's the most, you know, maybe this is just a little bit before Alex Ross, or close in around when Alex Ross would start, you know, doing the Marvel stuff and painting superheroes for DC. But this to me was like the most realistic depiction of Batman I'd ever seen. And I mean, it's still very comic booky, but it does pull a lot from, you know, photo reference and illustration to a certain extent. Glenn Fabry being a very solid artist. So just a great depiction of Batman. Those, whatever you call those coming out of his gloves, the spikes are just insanely huge. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone draw them that big. They would definitely be a weapon in this case, right? So the last kind of shot that Batman's kind of last bit of power tries to punch Bane and he doesn't even hit him. It's like a boxer who's spent and his cardio's gone. Even here showing you a few sequences prior to this fight with Bane where he was really beat down. Excuse me. And yeah, so this is what I remembered. I thought, so he actually falls and one of them, it stabs through his midsection. So yeah, Batman, like I said, on the brink of death here. And Bane's just going to take advantage of that to break his back. I like this effect here. It's a little more old school, but I think it works really well in the context of this specific panel to really add some brutal power to Bane's punch there. Swak. I really like the lettering on this. A little bit of Kirby crackle breaking out of there. It's pretty cool. And there's the pivotal sequence, which again, I will say I think Apparel does a really good job of storytelling and bringing us through this sequence all throughout this comic very clearly, concisely. You know, Apparel was another guy that I feel was doing a lot of just kind of head-on shots in a lot of his comics, and I feel like with this one, he really put in the effort for some interesting angles, some down shots, some up shots, right? And this is definitely a good one here. Not easy to draw one character kind of flat with a bit of foreshortening, and then this character from the other angle looking down. I think he succeeds really well here. And there it is, that famous panel where he actually breaks his back. Like this kind of deal. For effect, I think that works really well. The actual shape of the panel. And that's it. Broken and done. And even though he's upside down, you can kind of see the look of pain on Batman's face, right? And there you go, guys. That is it for my review of Batman 497, The Breaking of the Bat. If you were watching and you are still subscribed, thank you so much for sticking around. I really do appreciate it. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It really helps out the channel, helps us grow, helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. We're close to hitting that 500 mark where we become an official YouTube channel and YouTube starts helping us out and helps get us out there to other people. So once again, thank you so much, guys, for watching and have an awesome day.
Like! Subscribe! Like! Subscribe!
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13. 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at kingcomics.ca, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.